A nanny hears cries coming from the bathroom and finds a child locked inside, weak and covered in bruises. She soon realizes it was not a punishment, but part of a cruel system of control and punishment. Even under threat, she decides to document everything: audio recordings, medical exams, videos, and the ignored signs. What she later reveals exposes a silent crime almost erased by luxury and power. In the luxurious penthouse of the Atlantic Tower in Chelsea, New York City, the silence was only interrupted by the discreet sound of footsteps from Jane Connors, 32, the newly hired nanny for the Miller-Albright family. The spacious apartment, decorated with artworks and designer furniture, reflected the privileged social standing of its residents. Richard Miller-Albright, 42, a real estate development entrepreneur, his wife Victoria Montgomery, 38, a digital influencer and fashion industry entrepreneur, and little Louisa, 7, daughter from Richard's first marriage to Beatrice Summers, who had passed away in a car accident 3 years prior. Jane, a black woman born in the East End of London, had carved out her professional space after years of study and work. With a degree in education, she found a livelihood as a nanny while seeking an opportunity as an educator. On her first day at the Miller-Albright residence, she received precise instructions from Victoria. Louisa is a difficult child. She needs boundaries. Don't be fooled by her angelic face. She has strict schedules and rules to follow. Her meals are separate and special because of allergies. She should not move freely around the house unsupervised, as she has already broken valuable objects. As the stepmother spoke, Jane observed for the first time the girl sitting quietly in a corner of the living room, dressed in impeccable clothes yet with a distant gaze. When Victoria left for an appointment, Jane approached Louisa. "Hi, little one, I'm Jane, your new nanny. Can we be friends?" The girl merely nodded without speaking. Jane immediately noticed the child's pronounced thinness, disproportionate for her age, and the way she kept her arms crossed over her body, as if wanting to protect herself. "Do you like to draw? Can we do something together?" Louisa looked around as if checking if anyone was nearby and whispered, "Aunt Victoria doesn't like it when I make noise." In the first few days, Jane closely observed the household routine. Louisa's father, Richard, was rarely present, involved in a major real estate deal that kept him at the office late. The stepmother, Victoria, divided her time between the fashion atelier she co-owned with a friend and social engagements with the New York City elite. It was on the third day that the first incident occurred. Jane was organizing Louisa's school supplies when she heard muffled crying coming from the master suite bathroom. As she approached, she realized the door was locked. She called for Louisa, and the girl's fragile voice answered from the other side. "I'm grounded, Aunt Jane. I can't come out." "Who put you in there, Louisa?" "Why, Aunt Victoria. She said I spilled juice on the Persian rug." Jane tried to open the door, but it was indeed locked. She looked around, worried, and whispered to the child, "I'll get some water and something for you to eat. Don't worry." In the kitchen, Jane prepared a sandwich and put water in a small bottle. Returning to the bathroom, she crouched down and pushed the items through the small gap under the door. From the other side, she heard an almost inaudible thank you. After a few hours, Victoria returned from her engagements. Jane, trying not to show her indignation, casually asked about Louisa. "Oh, she's grounded. She needs to learn to respect other people's things." "Don't worry, it's part of her upbringing." "And how long will she be in there?" "As long as it takes for her to reflect on what she did," Victoria replied coldly, while checking messages on her phone. That night, when the stepmother retired, Jane searched for the bathroom key. She found it hidden in Richard's office in a drawer. Silently, she went to the bathroom and unlocked the door. Louisa was sitting on the floor, hugging her knees. Upon seeing Jane, her eyes filled with tears. The nanny took the girl into her arms and noticed she was dehydrated. Carefully, she took her to the bedroom, helped her clean up and change clothes. That's when she saw the bruises on the child's arms and legs, some recent, others already yellowish, indicating different stages of healing. "Louisa, who did this to you?" The girl lowered her eyes. "I fell." Jane knew that wasn't the truth, but she didn't want to pressure her. She helped Louisa lie down and stayed by her side until she fell asleep. As she watched the child's restless sleep, she began to realize the extent of the problem she faced. The next morning, during breakfast, Jane noticed another alarming situation. While Victoria and Richard helped themselves to a lavish breakfast, with fruits, breads, cheeses, and juices, Louisa received only a small portion of unsweetened porridge and half an apple. Louisa is on a special dietary program, by medical recommendation, Victoria explained, noticing the nanny's gaze. She has a tendency towards obesity. She inherited it from her mother. Jane observed the girl, visibly malnourished, and felt a knot in her stomach. Later, while tidying Louisa's room, she discovered a notebook hidden under the mattress. In it there were drawings made by the child, dark figures behind bars, a small girl surrounded by monsters, a house with locked doors. The nanny felt a chill run down her spine. That same day, Jane noticed something even more disturbing. The penthouse's security system, with cameras and sensors, had specific configurations to monitor Louisa's movements. An alert would trigger whenever the girl approached the kitchen outside designated hours, or tried to enter areas like the home theater or living room when she wasn't accompanied. That evening, when Richard finally arrived home from work, Jane tried to initiate a conversation about Louisa. "Mr. Richard, I've noticed Louisa seems a bit down. Has she been seeing a doctor regularly?" "Victoria handles that," he replied, distracted as he reviewed documents. "My daughter has always been delicate since losing her mother, but I completely trust my wife to take care of her." Jane realized that the father was completely oblivious to his daughter's reality. She then understood that she would need to act on her own if she wanted to protect Louisa. That night she made a decision. She would start documenting everything she witnessed. She bought a small notebook, which she kept in her bag, and began meticulously recording times, situations, phrases, and behaviors. The first entry was clear and direct. March 5th, Louisa locked in the bathroom for 7 hours. No lunch. Bruises on arms and legs in different stages. Claim of falling not convincing. Security system programmed to restrict the child's movements. Severely restricted diet. Jane didn't yet know what she would do with that information, but she was sure of one thing. She wouldn't remain silent while an innocent child suffered. As the weeks passed, Jane established a routine of careful observation. Her notebook grew with daily entries, and she began to structure the information by categories: diet, punishments, physical state, behavior, and family interactions. The pattern that emerged was disturbing. On a Saturday morning, while Victoria attended a charity event at the Plaza Hotel and Richard played tennis at the Riverdale Country Club, Jane took the opportunity to take Louisa to the penthouse garden. The girl, who rarely smiled, showed contained enthusiasm upon seeing the plants and feeling the sun on her skin. "Aunt Jane, can I touch the flowers?" "Of course, little one. They're yours too." Louisa hesitated, looking at the cameras. "Aunt Victoria says I can contaminate the plants with my germs." Jane's heart ached. "That's not true, Louisa. Come, let's touch them together." That afternoon, while the girl was taking a rare, peaceful nap, Jane decided to investigate further. In Richard's office, she found a folder with Louisa's medical documents. Among them, recent laboratory test results showed severe deficiencies in iron, vitamin D, protein, and calcium. The pediatrician's report from Dr. Paul Marshall contained a prominent observation: nutritional status incompatible with the family's socioeconomic level. Immediate intervention required. Jane discreetly photographed the documents with her cell phone. Then she searched the family computer system for more information. She found bank statements that showed an alarming pattern. While there were exorbitant expenses in Victoria's name for luxury stores, spas, and restaurants, the amounts allocated to Louisa for clothes, school supplies, and children's activities were negligible. The next day, Jane decided to speak with Sebastian, the building's security guard, who occasionally came up to check the penthouse's alarm system. A middle-aged man, discreet and observant, Sebastian had worked in the police force before entering private security. "Mr. Sebastian, I've noticed the alarm system triggers when Louisa moves around the house. Is that common in other units?" The man looked around and lowered his voice. "Miss, in 15 years in this profession, I've never seen anything like it. I have access to the system logs, and I can tell you there are specific restrictions programmed to monitor the girl. It's as if she were an intruder in her own home. Could you show me those records?" Hesitant but visibly concerned, Sebastian agreed. He handed Jane a printed copy of the records from the last 3 months. The data was appalling. Daily sensor activations when Louisa tried to access the kitchen outside established hours, alerts when she approached her father's room. Access restrictions to the balcony and social areas. Mrs. Victoria configured all of this, Sebastian explained. She said the girl had problems and needed to be monitored for her own safety. At home, after work, Jane analyzed the information she had been collecting. The dossier grew. Louisa's drawings increasingly somber, showing figures in prisons, discrete photographs of the bruises, copies of medical exams, food records showing the disparity between the family's meals and the minimal portions allocated to the child, security system logs. A rainy afternoon brought another disturbing episode. Jane was helping Louisa with her homework when Victoria arrived earlier than expected. Irritated by a cancelled fashion show, she took out her frustration on her stepdaughter. "Go get my anti-aging cream from the car," she ordered. "But it's raining heavily," Jane argued. "I didn't ask for your opinion." "Louisa, go now." The girl, trembling, obeyed. Jane observed through the external camera how Victoria, from the comfort of the covered balcony, kept the child standing in the rain for long minutes, even after receiving the cream. The nanny discreetly recorded the scene with her cell phone, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. When Louisa was finally allowed inside, she was soaked and trembling. Jane helped her change clothes and prepared a hot tea, circumventing Victoria's prohibition on hot drinks for the girl. "Why doesn't Aunt Victoria like me?" Louisa asked, her voice choked. She has problems, little one." "It's not your fault," Jane replied, hugging her. That night, the nanny began to think about how she could intervene. Her concern grew when, the next morning, Louisa woke up with a fever. Victoria minimized the situation, refusing to call a doctor. "It's just a tantrum. Give her an antipyretic and send her to school." Jane took the initiative to contact the pediatrician directly. Dr. Paul saw Louisa in his office after regular hours at the nanny's request. The diagnosis: onset of pneumonia aggravated by malnutrition. "This child needs proper care, improved nutrition and rest," the doctor stated, concerned. "How did this happen?" Jane explained the situation privately. The doctor, visibly disturbed, prescribed antibiotics and a special diet, documenting everything in a detailed report that he handed to the nanny. "If the situation continues like this, we'll have to take more serious measures," he warned. Back at the penthouse, Jane faced Victoria's fury. "Who authorized you to take my stepdaughter to the doctor? Are you trying to undermine me? Louisa has pneumonia. She needs care. I decide what she needs or doesn't need. You are just an employee. Don't forget that." That night, Jane made a risky decision. Using a small recorder hidden in her uniform, she taped a conversation with Victoria while helping her organize her closet. "I don't understand why you worry so much about Louisa," the stepmother said, trying on a ball gown. "That girl is a nuisance in my life. If it were up to me, she'd be invisible. Richard should never have gotten custody of her." "Don't you like children, ma'am?" "I'd like to have my own children, not a constant reminder of the deceased." Victoria adjusted the dress on her slender body. "I'm planning to send Louisa to a boarding school far away from here as soon as I can convince Richard. She just gets in the way of our perfect life." Jane felt a shiver. "What if she refuses to go?" Victoria smiled coldly. "Who said she'll have a choice? Richard trusts me blindly. I do what I want in this house." The clear and incriminating recording was saved on the storage device Jane kept hidden. That would be the most damning evidence to date. The next day, while helping Louisa with a lukewarm bath to bring down her persistent fever, the nanny noticed new bruises on the child's back. "What happened here, sweetie?" Louisa, weakened by illness, couldn't maintain her rehearsed narrative. "Aunt Victoria pushed me against the sink last night. She said I was taking too long to brush my teeth." Jane photographed the marks and added them to her growing file. The situation was escalating, and she realized she needed to act quickly. It was then, while checking her email, that she found an anonymous message. "We know what you're doing. Stop interfering or you will suffer consequences." The threat only strengthened her resolve. That same afternoon, while Louisa slept under the effect of medication, Jane made a call that would change everything. She contacted Child Protective Services, CPS, of Manhattan, New York City. My name is Jane Connors. I am the nanny for Louisa Miller Albright, 7 years old. I need to report a serious situation of abuse. The visit from Child Protective Services was scheduled for 2 days later. Jane did not inform the family, following the guidance of Counselor Marissa Gordon, who explained that surprise visits were more effective in assessing the child's real situation. In the meantime, the nanny continued documenting everything, becoming increasingly attentive to the household dynamics. On the morning of the inspection, Louisa was still recovering from pneumonia, but was already showing improvement thanks to the antibiotics and extra care Jane managed to provide when Victoria was not present. The doorbell rang at 10:15 a.m., a time when normally only Jane and Louisa would be home. To the nanny's surprise, however, Victoria had cancelled all her engagements that morning, claiming she needed to work from home. Upon opening the door and facing 2 duly identified Child Protective Services counsellors, Victoria's face instantly transformed. Her cold and controlling demeanour gave way to a warm and welcoming smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "Good morning, ma'am. We are from Child Protective Services of Manhattan. We are conducting routine visits to check on the well-being of children in the area," Marissa explained, following the protocol of not immediately revealing the existence of a complaint. "How wonderful. Please come in. We are fully in favor of these child protection initiatives." Jane, observing from the hallway entrance, was impressed by Victoria's instant transformation. The stepmother led the counselors through the immaculate penthouse, speaking about her unconditional love for her stepdaughter and the adaptations she had made to the house to better welcome the beloved daughter of her great love. What most surprised Jane was the breakfast table. As the counselors were led to the living room, Victoria passed through the kitchen and instructed the housekeeper, "Set a lavish table for Louisa. Fruits, breads, cakes, juices, everything we have." Quickly, in minutes, an abundant meal was prepared, something Jane had never seen offered to the girl. Victoria then went to Louisa's room, where she found her still drowsy from the medication. "Get up, darling. We have important visitors, and Mommy needs you to be a good girl today," she whispered, helping her put on a new dress that Jane had never seen before. In the living room, Victoria presented an elaborate narrative about Louisa's fragile health since the loss of her biological mother, emphasizing the special care the girl received. "We invested in the best doctors, the best diet adapted to her needs. You can check the medical reports," she said, handing over a folder with carefully selected documents. Jane noticed that those were not the same reports she had found in the office. These seemed like edited versions, where observations about malnutrition had been omitted. When Louisa was brought into the room, still pale from her recent illness, Victoria explained, "Our princess is recovering from a flu. We are following all medical recommendations, aren't we, my love?" Louisa, conditioned by months of intimidation, merely nodded, glancing briefly at Jane, who remained in a corner of the room. The counselors asked to speak with the child alone, and Victoria, after a moment of hesitation, agreed with a forced smile. "Of course, feel free. I'll take the opportunity to prepare some tea for all of us." In Louisa's room, transformed with new toys still tagged, the counselors tried to establish a casual conversation with the girl. Initially reticent, Louisa responded only with monosyllables. Marissa, experienced in similar cases, used gradual approach techniques. "What a beautiful room you have, Louisa. Do you like living here?" "Yes, ma'am. And what's your daily life like? Do you play, study, have friends?" "I study and stay home. Aunt Jane plays with me when Aunt Victoria lets me." The counselor noted the "when she lets me" and continued gently, "And what happens when you do something Aunt Victoria doesn't like?" Louisa looked at the door, checking if it was really closed. Even so, she lowered her voice. "I get grounded." "What kind of punishment, dear?" The girl hesitated, but then, in a lapse of courage, or simply because she was tired of pretending, whispered, "Sometimes I'm locked in the bathroom as punishment." The counselor kept a neutral expression, but made discreet notes. "How long do you stay there?" "Until Aunt Victoria thinks I've learned my lesson. Once I stayed there all day." Outside the room, Victoria monitored the conversation through the surveillance system installed in the bedroom, which Jane was unaware of. When she heard Louisa's revelation, she immediately returned to the living room. interrupting the interview with the excuse that Louisa needed to take her medication. "Our princess has a very fertile imagination," Victoria commented with a forced laugh while serving tea to the counselors. "She loves to invent stories ever since she started attending drama classes. Isn't she charming?" Counselor Marissa, however, had already noted enough. "Mrs. Montgomery, we would also like to speak with the nanny, if possible." "Jane?" "Of course, but she's only been with us for a short time. I don't know if she'll have much to contribute." Victoria shot a warning glance at Jane. As the nanny approached, in a separate room, the counselor asked directly about her observations. Jane, fearing for her job, but more concerned about Louisa's well-being, confirmed some of the situations she had documented, mentioning the prolonged punishments, restricted diet, and intrusive surveillance system. At the end of the visit, the counselors thanked them and informed them they would make a report. As soon as the door closed, Victoria's expression transformed again. "Who made the complaint?" "It was you, wasn't it?" she accused, pointing at Jane. "I don't know what you're talking about, ma'am. Don't play dumb. You're investigating my life, snooping through my documents. Do you think I didn't notice? The cameras record everything." Jane maintained her composure. "I'm just doing my job as a nanny. Your job is to take care of the brat according to my rules. Don't meddle where you're not wanted." The argument was interrupted by the unexpected return of Richard, who had left the office earlier due to an anonymous call informing him about the Child Protective Services visit. "What's going on here?" "Who were those women leaving our building?" Victoria quickly composed herself. "Oh, darling, a routine visit from Child Protective Services. They're checking on all the families in the neighborhood, nothing to worry about." Richard frowned. "Why didn't you tell me?" "It was all very sudden. I didn't want to bother you with bureaucracy while you're closing that important deal." The businessman seemed to accept the explanation, but his gaze fell on Louisa, who was watching the scene from her bedroom door. Still dressed in clothes that were not her usual ones. "Is my princess sick?" he asked, finally noticing his daughter's paleness. "Just a mild flu," Victoria interjected. "She's already on medication. It's nothing serious." "Pneumonia," Jane corrected, unable to restrain herself, diagnosed by Dr. Paul 2 days ago. Richard looked surprised at his wife. "Pneumonia? Why wasn't I informed?" "I didn't want to worry you with something we're handling perfectly well," Victoria replied, shooting a furious glance at Jane. "Besides, this employee has been exaggerating all the symptoms. She's always alarmist." At that moment, Jane understood that her position in the house was definitely compromised. Nevertheless, she decided to stay as long as possible, at least until she could ensure Louisa was safe. The next day, her suspicion was confirmed. Victoria called her to the office and, without mincing words, fired her. "Your services are no longer needed. You have 1 hour to collect your belongings and leave. Can I at least say goodbye to Louisa? She's at school. And it's better this way. Clean breaks are less painful," Victoria replied with a cold smile. "Oh, and before I forget, money was missing from my wallet yesterday." "We know it was you." Jane paled. "What? I've never taken anything that didn't belong to me. Your word against mine. And guess which one carries more weight?" Victoria opened a drawer and took out an envelope. "Here's your termination. By signing, you admit to having taken money, but I won't file a police report if you leave immediately and never approach my family again." "This is a setup. I won't sign anything." "Then prepare to face a lawsuit for theft, defamation, and invasion of privacy. I have proof that you accessed confidential documents on my computer." Jane left without signing, taking with her only her personal belongings and the USB drive with all the evidence she had collected. At the concierge desk, Sebastian, the security guard, approached her discreetly. "Mrs. Jane, I heard you were let go." "I'm very sorry." "Thank you, Mr. Sebastian. Please keep an eye on Louisa for me." The man nodded and handed her a card. "That's the contact for a friend of mine, a lawyer. He's worked on similar cases. You can trust him." As she left the luxurious Chelsea building, Jane received a notification on her phone. A story on a gossip website accused her of stealing jewelry from influencer and entrepreneur Victoria Montgomery. The smear campaign was beginning, but Jane was determined not to back down. That battle was just starting. After her dismissal, Jane immediately sought out the lawyer recommended by Sebastian. Anthony Farrell, 56, a family law specialist and former public defender, received her in his modest office in downtown New York City. "I need to be frank with you, Jane," he said after examining the evidence on the USB drive. "We're up against powerful people. Richard Miller Albright has connections with influential politicians and businessmen. Victoria Montgomery, in addition to her own family fortune, has built a public image as a dedicated mother and philanthropist. It's going to be your word against theirs, and all this evidence is worth nothing." "They are, but we need more. Child Protective Services has already opened an investigation, which is a good start. However, most of your evidence was obtained in a, shall we say, unconventional manner. I had to protect that child. I understand, and I believe you. That's why we need to strengthen our case with witnesses and evidence collected through official channels." The next day, the lawyer contacted Counselor Marissa, who confirmed the opening of an investigative process. Meanwhile, Jane faced the consequences of the smear campaign initiated by Victoria. In addition to the theft accusation, rumors emerged about her unstable behavior and unhealthy obsession with the child. "We need to act fast," Anthony stated. "In addition to Child Protective Services, I'll file a motion with the family court. Meanwhile, continue gathering information, but without directly approaching the family." Jane found unexpected support in Connie Stone, the cook for the Miller Albright family, who secretly contacted her 3 days after her dismissal. "I can't stand seeing what they do to that girl anymore," Connie confided in a cafe far from Chelsea. "After you left, things got worse. Victoria practically doesn't let anyone talk to Louisa. The new nanny is her niece. She just obeys orders without questioning. Can you help me with evidence, Connie? I've been photographing the separate meals as you taught me. And yesterday I managed to record when Victoria yelled at the girl for asking to call her father, who is traveling." The new evidence was added to the dossier. In parallel, Dr. Paul Marshall, Louisa's pediatrician, contacted Jane after being informed by a nurse about the news of her alleged criminal conduct. "I don't believe a word of what they're saying about you," the doctor stated. "I've been following Louisa for 3 years and have noticed alarming changes in her health and behavior since her father remarried. I will provide my formal testimony to the authorities." The support network grew, but Victoria also mobilized her resources. Using her influence as a content creator, with over 2 million followers, she launched a subliminal campaign about the danger of envious employees who approach successful families. On her social media, she posted idyllic images with Louisa, always well-dressed and seemingly happy, using captions like, "Nothing like true family love and protecting what is most precious." Richard, still oblivious to the complete reality, began to question small details he had previously ignored. One night, returning early from a trip, he found Louisa dining alone in the kitchen, while Victoria entertained friends with a sophisticated dinner in the main dining room. "Why isn't my daughter with us at the table?" he asked, finding the situation odd. "Darling, you know Louisa has special schedules because of her medication," Victoria replied naturally. "Besides, she gets bored with adult conversations. She prefers to stay with Connie in the kitchen." The explanation seemed to satisfy him momentarily, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Meanwhile, the case took on new dimensions. Felicity Lowe, an investigative journalist for the Independent Eye portal, received an anonymous tip about the situation. After preliminarily verifying some facts, she contacted Jane for an interview. "I want to hear your side. The accusations against you seem fabricated, especially knowing Victoria Montgomery's history and other conflicts." "What do you mean, other conflicts?" The journalist explained that it wasn't the first time Victoria had used her influence to attack people who opposed her. There was a similar case with an esthetician who worked in her beauty clinic and reported irregular practices. The woman ended up moving out of state after the persecution she suffered. With the journalistic investigation underway, other voices began to emerge. A former teacher of Louisa from her previous school contacted Jane's lawyer, reporting how the girl had changed drastically after her father's remarriage. She was a cheerful, participatory child. Afterwards, she became withdrawn, frequently sleepy in class and constantly hungry. I even reported it to the administration, but the family transferred Louisa to another school shortly after. The case became complicated when Victoria, feeling cornered, requested and obtained a restraining order against Jane, prohibiting her from approaching the family or publicly mentioning their names. The justification: obsessive persecution and attempted extortion. "This is ridiculous," Jane protested in a meeting with her lawyer. "They're twisting everything around." "It's a common tactic," Anthony explained. "Attack to defend. But don't worry, we're making progress." Child Protective Services requested an independent psychological evaluation for Louisa, and the family court judge accepted our request to include the previous medical reports as evidence. A turning point occurred when Sebastian, the security guard, was fired from the condominium after Victoria pressured the building manager, alleging breach of trust. Free from the family's control, he decided to collaborate fully, providing complete copies of security records from the last 6 months, including camera recordings that showed Victoria pushing Louisa or locking her in rooms for hours. Journalist Felicity, after weeks of discreet investigation, published the first part of a special series titled Appearances: The Hidden Face of the New York City Elite. Without directly naming names, to avoid lawsuits, the text presented a detailed case of a financially privileged child, but emotionally neglected, living in a luxurious Chelsea apartment. The report generated commotion on social media. Many of Victoria's followers began to connect the dots, especially after the journalist mentioned a digital influencer who excessively posts about fake motherhood while mistreating her stepdaughter behind the scenes. Victoria reacted with fury, threatening to sue the portal. Her lawyer, however, advised her not to explicitly mention the report, to avoid publicly confirming it was about her. At home, Victoria's behavior became increasingly erratic. Richard, now more attentive, began to notice disturbing patterns: how Louisa recoiled when her stepmother approached, how she waited for permission to speak or eat, how her clothes always seemed too large, hiding her body. One afternoon, while looking for a document in the office, he accidentally found a folder hidden at the back of a drawer. In it, an original medical report for Louisa, very different from the version Victoria had shown him, detailing malnutrition, severe anemia, and signs consistent with chronic stress. Confronted, Victoria exploded, "You're never here. I have to deal with that problematic girl alone. She's just like her mother, manipulative, wants all the attention for herself." The argument escalated, and Louisa, hearing everything from her room, frantically called the only number she knew by heart besides her father's, Jane's. "Despite the restraining order," the nanny answered, "Aunt Jane, they're fighting a lot." "I'm scared." "Calm down, little one. Where are you now?" "In my room, hidden in the closet. I'll send help, I promise. Stay quiet in there." Jane immediately contacted her lawyer, who alerted Child Protective Services. An emergency visit was organized, with the presence of police and counselors. When they arrived at the apartment, they found a chaotic scene: broken furniture in the living room, Richard with a cut above his eyebrow after being hit by an object thrown by Victoria, and Louisa trembling in her bedroom closet, clutching her cell phone. Counselor Marissa took charge. "We are here due to a report of a child in danger. We will need to take Louisa for immediate medical and psychological evaluation." Victoria, out of control, screamed accusations against everyone, especially against Jane. "That little maid is behind all of this. She wants to destroy my family." Richard, finally confronted with the reality he had ignored for so long, offered no resistance. "Do whatever is best for my daughter," he said, his voice choked. I didn't realize. I didn't want to see." Louisa was taken to a specialized children's hospital, where doctors confirmed her worrying condition: 12 kilograms below the ideal weight for her age, multiple bruises in different stages of healing, signs of chronic dehydration, and clear symptoms of post-traumatic stress. The legal dispute had just officially begun, with the child now under temporary state protection. 3 weeks passed since Louisa was taken for medical evaluation and placed under temporary state protection. The girl was now in a specialized shelter for children in traumatic situations, receiving medical care, adequate nutrition, and psychological counseling. Jane, despite the restraining order, obtained judicial authorization to visit her twice a week, always supervised by a social worker. In these meetings, She noticed small changes in the child's behavior. A shy smile here, a spontaneous question there, the acceptance of a hug that would have frightened her before. "Aunt Jane, will I be able to live with you?" Louisa asked during one of these visits, while drawing a bright yellow sun, an image that never appeared in her previous drawings. "I don't know, little one. There are many people deciding what's best for you now, but I promise to always be close by, no matter where you are." Child psychologist Dr. Teresa Fields, responsible for Louisa's care, invited Jane for a conversation after the visit. "You are a very important reference figure for her. In our sessions, Louisa mentions you as the only person who protected and fed her properly. In her first few days here, she would hide food under her pillow, afraid it would be denied later. Is she better now?" "Physically, yes. The nutritionist managed to devise a meal plan that is already showing results. She has gained 3 kilograms, and her blood tests are normalizing. Emotionally, we have a long way to go. Louisa shows clear signs of trauma, frequent nightmares, fear of adults, especially women, self-preservation behaviors like hiding food, speaking softly, and asking permission for everything. Meanwhile, the case gained larger dimensions. Felicity Lowe's series of reports, now in its 3rd part, had attracted national media attention. Other outlets began investigating the case, and soon more explicit stories emerged, naming names and including family photos. Richard Miller Albright, initially reluctant to accept the extent of the problem, was going through a painful process of acknowledging his negligence. In an exclusive interview on a high-profile TV show, he admitted through tears, "I failed as a father. I was so absorbed in my business, so comfortable delegating my daughter's care, that I didn't realize what was happening under my own roof." There's no excuse for it. Richard's public confession provoked mixed reactions. Many criticized him for his omission, while others praised his courage in taking responsibility. Victoria, in turn, intensified her defense campaign, hiring a public relations agency to manage the image crisis. On her official profile, she posted a tearful video in which she presented herself as the victim of a conspiracy. "I am being persecuted by envious and resentful people. I loved Louisa as if she were my own daughter. All I did was follow medical guidelines for a child who already came into my life with serious problems. The nanny, who now presents herself as a savior, actually wanted to kidnap the girl for ransom." The absurd accusation was quickly refuted by witnesses, including Louisa's current school. Pedagogical coordinator Camille Davis sent a detailed report to the family court, documenting how the girl had arrived at the institution. "Louisa enrolled in our school 8 months ago, transferred from another institution. From the beginning, we noticed worrying behaviors: isolation, difficulty concentrating, constant fatigue, progressive weight loss. On the rare occasions she ate in the cafeteria, she ate voraciously, as if she didn't have regular access to adequate meals. In art expression activities, her drawings frequently depicted solitary figures, dark colors, and elements of confinement." The report also included accounts of how Victoria refused to attend pedagogical meetings, always sending the nanny or an assistant, and how she rejected suggestions for psychological evaluation for her stepdaughter. The official investigation advanced when a former family employee, Denise Oliver, who had worked as a housekeeper in the house before Jane's arrival, contacted the district attorney's office with new elements. "I worked for them for 8 months and was fired when I started questioning the treatment given to the girl. I have photos of bruises Louisa had over a year ago, audio recordings of Victoria yelling at her for breathing too loudly, and even a video where she forces the child to stand for hours as punishment for spilling water on the sofa." The evidence presented by Denise corroborated the pattern identified by Jane, showing that the mistreatment was not recent, but had been part of a systematic behavior since Richard's marriage to Victoria. Pressure mounted when a judicially authorized financial audit revealed that Victoria managed a joint account intended for Louisa's expenses, but used most of the resources for personal spending. "We identified a consistent pattern of diversion," the forensic accountant explained in his report. "Of the $15,000 monthly allocated for the minor's needs, on average only $200 was effectively used for this purpose. The remainder financed luxury purchases, cosmetic procedures, and Mrs. Montgomery's travels. Cornered by the growing evidence, Victoria adopted a more sophisticated victimization strategy. She hired a private medical team that presented reports, suggesting Louisa suffered from congenital eating disorders and self-harming tendencies that would justify the marks on her body. Dr. Paul Marshall, the pediatrician who had been following Louisa since she was a baby, vehemently contested these reports in his official testimony. "I followed Louisa since her birth. She was a perfectly healthy child, with normal development until she was 4 years old. The changes in her health status coincided exactly with the stepmother's entry into her life. I have documented in my records how I tried to intervene multiple times, but always met resistance from Mrs. Montgomery, who frequently cancelled appointments or changed medications on her own." The preliminary hearing at the family court was scheduled for early October, and both Jane and Richard prepared intensely, each in their own way. Jane continued her regular visits to Louisa, bringing small gifts allowed by the institution, books, drawing materials, a soft pajama that the girl loved. Richard, in turn, began intensive therapy and a parental re-education program, determined to demonstrate that he could be the father his daughter deserved. He publicly broke with Victoria, requesting an annulment of the marriage due to vitiated consent and conduct incompatible with family values. As the hearing date approached, Jane received an unexpected phone call from Connie, the cook who still worked for Richard. "Jane, I think you need to know this. Last night, after Mr. Richard left to meet with the lawyers, Victoria came to pick up some things. She didn't know I was in the service area. She was on the phone with someone saying horrible things." "What kind of things?" "She said that if she lost the case, that brat would regret it. She said she knew people in several states who could hide the girl when no one would ever find her. And she mentioned something about accidents that leave no trace." Jane's blood ran cold. "Did you record that?" "Yes. Ever since you taught me, I started recording whenever she's around. You never know." The recording, clear and frightening, was immediately forwarded to lawyer Anthony, who presented it as additional evidence of the danger posed by Victoria. Based on this new element, he secured an even stricter protective order, prohibiting any contact between Victoria and Louisa, even if supervised. On the eve of the hearing, Jane received a surprise visit from Richard at her modest home in Queens, where she had moved after losing her job. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said, visibly distraught. "But I need you to know that I'm doing everything I can to fix my mistakes. It's not to me you owe explanations, it's to your daughter. I know. And I intend to dedicate the rest of my life to regaining her trust. But today I came here to thank you. You did what I, as a father, should have done. You protected my daughter at all costs." Jane nodded cautiously, but recognizing the sincerity in the words of the man before her. "What's going to happen tomorrow?" she asked. "My lawyers believe the judge should keep Louisa under state protection for at least a few more months while I prove my ability to care for her adequately. I'm willing to accept any conditions they set. Family therapy, supervised visits, constant monitoring. I just want my daughter back and safe. And Victoria?" Richard's face hardened. "She faces serious charges. My lawyers are fully cooperating with the prosecution. We discovered things I can't even repeat without feeling nauseous. How could I have been so blind?" The next day, the family court was surrounded by journalists. The case had captured national attention, raising debates about negligence in affluent families, the role of domestic workers in child protection, and the challenges of blended families. Jane, accompanied by her lawyer, walked through the crowd with her head held high. She knew that day would only be the beginning of a long battle, but she was prepared. For Louisa, she would face whatever was necessary. The family court of New York City was exceptionally busy that October morning. Journalists, curious onlookers, and child rights activists crowded the corridors while police tried to maintain order. The courtroom, however, remained protected from the commotion, with access restricted to parties directly involved in the proceedings. Jane arrived accompanied by her lawyer, Anthony, and by Marissa, the CPS counselor who had been instrumental since the beginning of the case. She wore a simple but formal outfit, a knee-length navy blue skirt and a long-sleeved white shirt. She had spent the previous night awake, mentally reviewing every detail that might be questioned. At the entrance to the courtroom, she crossed paths with Richard, who seemed equally tense. He nodded discreetly, a gesture she returned with a brief nod of her head. Unlike the always impeccable image he maintained in business circles, the man displayed deep dark circles under his eyes and appeared to have lost weight. "He seems genuinely shaken," Anthony commented. "Too late," Jane replied, although a part of her recognized the genuine suffering in Louisa's father's expression. Victoria arrived minutes later, causing a stir in the corridor. In contrast to her ex-husband's distraught appearance, she was impeccably made up. A designer cream dress, perfect makeup, hair in an elegant bun. She was accompanied by a team of 3 lawyers, led by Charles Edward Mason, known for defending celebrities and politicians in high-profile cases. The hearing began promptly at 10 a.m. Judge Robert Ashton, known for his firm stance in cases of child abuse, initiated the proceedings by establishing the basic rules. The sole purpose of this hearing is to determine the necessary measures to ensure the safety and well-being of the minor Louisa Miller Albright. I will not tolerate turning this courtroom into a stage for personal disputes or media exposure. The first to testify was psychologist Teresa Fields, who had been accompanying Louisa at the specialized shelter. In a calm and professional voice, she presented her evaluation. The minor exhibits clear signs of psychological trauma consistent with prolonged mistreatment. In the first few days, she refused to speak, recoiled when adults approached, and had panic attacks during the night. She displayed behaviors typical of institutionalized children, such as hiding food for hard times, although she had never lived in institutions before. Teresa went on to detail how Louisa began to express herself through drawings, initially somber and confined, but gradually incorporating more colors and open spaces. She also mentioned the progress in therapy sessions. In the 3rd week, Louisa began to verbalize her experiences. She described punishments such as being locked in the bathroom for hours that felt like days, being deprived of meals for not deserving to eat, and having alarms that beeped when she tried to walk around the house without permission. The psychologist presented drawings made by Louisa, including a particularly disturbing one that showed a small girl inside a cage, observed by a smiling adult figure. Victoria's lawyer tried to object. "Children have fertile imaginations and often mix fantasy with reality. We cannot take drawings as proof of mistreatment." "Mr. Mason, I have 25 years of experience in forensic child psychology," Teresa replied firmly. The consistency of Louisa's verbal and non-verbal accounts, combined with the documented physical signs and systematically observed behavior, forms an unequivocal picture of a child who lived under chronic stress and constant fear. The next to testify was Dr. Paul Marshall, Louisa's pediatrician. With charts and exams, he demonstrated how the girl's physical development had been compromised over the past 3 years. At 4 years old, Louisa was at the 50th percentile for weight and height for her age, perfectly healthy. At 7, when I last examined her before the intervention, she had fallen to the 10th percentile for weight. The exams showed severe nutritional deficiencies, incompatible with the family's socioeconomic standard. The only plausible explanation is systematic food restriction. The doctor directly confronted the reports presented by Victoria's defense. It is absurd to suggest that Louisa suffered from congenital eating disorders. No such diagnosis exists in medical literature, and the child's previous records categorically disprove this assertion. When it was Jane's turn to testify, the room was in complete silence. In a firm voice, she chronologically recounted her observations from her first day at the Miller Albright residence until her dismissal. She presented the notebook, the photographs, the recordings, every piece of evidence meticulously collected and dated. "I noticed something was wrong from the beginning. Louisa was extremely thin, submissive, and frightened. The stepmother established absurd rules, such as separate and extremely restricted meals, prohibition from moving freely around the house, disproportionate punishments for minimal infractions." Jane described the episode of the locked bathroom, the rain, the alarms configured to monitor the child, the bruises in different stages. Her voice faltered only once when recalling the moment Louisa asked her why the stepmother didn't like her. Victoria's lawyer tried to undermine Jane's credibility, bringing up the theft accusations. Anthony promptly intervened. "Your Honor, the theft accusation against my client was formally dismissed due to lack of evidence. We have here the police document confirming that there were no fingerprints from Jane in the locations she allegedly tampered with. On the contrary, only Mrs. Montgomery's fingerprints were found in the drawer she claimed had been violated. The judge accepted the document, adding it to the case files. Richard was next. Visibly emotional, he took responsibility. There's no excuse for what happened. I should have noticed. I should have questioned. I was so focused on my career, so comfortable delegating my daughter's care, that I ignored obvious signs. I accept any consequence of my negligence, and am committed to doing whatever is necessary to regain Louisa's trust and ensure her well-being. He presented the judge with certificates from the therapy and parental education programs he had been attending, as well as a detailed plan for Louisa's gradual readaptation under professional supervision. When it was finally Victoria's turn to testify, the woman presented a completely different version of events. With carefully controlled tears to avoid smudging her makeup, she described herself as a dedicated stepmother who merely followed medical guidelines for a problematic child. Louisa always had difficulties. I tried to help her with the best diet, the best doctors. The alarms. They were for her safety. She has a tendency to hurt herself. The punishments? Just moments for reflection, never abusive. This nanny manipulated everything, planted evidence, wanted to separate me from Louisa out of envy for our lifestyle. District Attorney Dr. Matthew Foster, who had remained silent until then, took the floor. Mrs. Montgomery, we have independent medical reports, testimonies from various professionals with no prior connection to each other, physical and electronic evidence. All point to a consistent pattern of mistreatment. Do you still maintain that everyone is lying, or that there is a conspiracy against you? They are misinterpreting the facts. I am a victim of persecution. And how do you explain this recording? The district attorney asked, playing the audio captured by Connie, where Victoria discussed the possibility of hiding Louisa or creating accidents that leave no trace. Victoria's face paled beneath her makeup. Her lawyers immediately protested, alleging illegal recording, but the judge had already admitted the evidence earlier, considering the exceptional nature of the case. That was taken out of context. I was just expressing frustration. The district attorney did not back down, and the bank statements showing systematic diversion of funds intended for the minor for your personal expenses, were those also taken out of context? Victoria's defense began to crumble when the judge called a surprise witness. Caroline Vance, a former nanny for the first family, where Victoria had been a stepmother 15 years prior. I worked for the Miller family between 2010 and 2012, caring for the son from Mr. Henry Miller's first marriage, who had married Victoria Montgomery. The pattern was identical: food restriction, excessive punishments, isolation of the child, attempts to send the boy to distant boarding schools. The revelation caused a commotion in the room. Not even Victoria's lawyers were prepared for that information. Caroline continued, I left because I couldn't bear what I witnessed, but unlike Jane, I didn't have the courage to report it. I've carried that weight on my conscience for years. When I saw this case in the media, I immediately recognized the pattern and knew I needed to speak up. After 8 hours of testimonies, Judge Robert Ashton announced that he would retire to analyze all the evidence before delivering his decision. The hearing would resume the next day. Upon leaving the court, Jane was approached by journalist Felicity. Your testimony was impeccable. How are you feeling? Exhausted but relieved to finally be heard. Now I only think about Louisa and what will be best for her. And if the judge decides to return custody to the father? Jane pondered for a moment. If he has truly changed and is committed to protecting her adequately, with appropriate supervision, perhaps it will be best for Louisa to regain some family normalcy. But it will have to be very gradual and careful. That night, none of the parties could sleep peacefully. Jane mentally reviewed every moment of the hearing. Richard contemplated the mistakes that almost cost his daughter's well-being. Victoria, isolated in a rented apartment, faced the prospect of consequences she never imagined she would encounter. The next morning, the courtroom was even more crowded. Judge Ashton entered with a grave expression and documents neatly arranged before him. After meticulous analysis of the evidence presented, testimonies and expert reports, this court is prepared to issue its decision in the case of the minor Louisa Miller Albright. The silence in the room was absolute. The future of a child was about to be decided. This court orders the permanent removal of Mrs. Victoria Montgomery from cohabitation with the minor Louisa Miller Albright, announced Judge Robert Ashton, his firm voice echoing in the silent room. The evidence of psychological mistreatment, dietary negligence, improper punishments, and misappropriation of funds intended for the minor are conclusive and alarming. Victoria let out a theatrical sob, promptly supported by her lawyers. The judge continued. As for Mr. Richard Miller Albright, this court recognizes the recent efforts to remedy his severe parental negligence. However, it is considered that the trauma suffered by Louisa requires a careful and monitored transition back to family life. The magistrate then detailed his decision. Louisa would remain under temporary state custody for another 4 months, during which Richard would continue his intensive therapy and parental re-education program. Visits, initially supervised and progressively freer, would depend on the continuous evaluation of the psychosocial team and the child's emotional well-being. I further order, the judge continued, that all resources diverted by Mrs. Montgomery be returned to a trust fund in the minor's name, to be administered by a court-appointed trustee until her adulthood. Finally, he turned to Jane. This court recognizes the fundamental role of Mrs. Jane Connors in the protection of the minor and the documentation of the violations suffered. Her courage and determination exemplify the civic duty not to remain silent in the face of a child's suffering, regardless of the circumstances. I authorize her continued role as a regular visitor to Louisa during the transition period, as recommended by the psychological team who attest to the positive bond established. The hearing concluded with the case being forwarded to the criminal court, where Victoria would face charges of mistreatment, misappropriation of funds and threats, while Richard would face charges of parental negligence. Upon leaving the court, Jane was surrounded by journalists. Unlike her reserved nature, she decided to speak briefly. Today, the nanny didn't win, nor did the stepmother lose. A child won, regaining her right to grow up in safety and love. I thank everyone who believed my word when it was just that, the word of an employee against a powerful family. In the following months, the lives of everyone involved radically transformed. Louisa at the specialized shelter began to blossom. Her drawings gained vibrant colors, her weight normalized, and she gradually returned to smiling and playing with other children. With Dr. Teresa's constant support, she slowly processed her trauma and rediscovered trust in adults. Jane, who feared never getting a nanny job again after the case's exposure, received several job offers. She chose, however, to accept a scholarship to complete her degree in education, offered by an NGO dedicated to child protection. In her free time, she began sharing her experience in lectures for domestic workers, teaching them how to identify and document signs of abuse. Richard sold the Chelsea penthouse, filled with painful memories, and moved to a smaller apartment in Greenwich Village. He temporarily stepped down from his company's presidency to dedicate himself fully to therapy and the parental re-education program. The process was painful, involving confronting his upbringing in an emotionally distant family, where appearances and financial success always prevailed over genuine connections. Victoria, after months of trying to manipulate public opinion, watched her digital influence empire crumble as followers and sponsors abandoned her en masse. Her criminal trial proceeded, with new witnesses emerging, including employees from other residences where she had lived as a stepmother, all reporting similar patterns of abusive behavior. 6 months after the court's decision, the time came for Louisa's gradual transition to her father's home. The first visits took place at the shelter, followed by supervised outings and eventually weekends at Richard's new residence. "Daddy redecorated my room," Louisa enthusiastically told Jane during a visit. "It has a bookshelf full of books and a table for me to draw, and there are no cameras or alarms. How wonderful, little one. And how are you feeling there?" "I still get a little scared sometimes, especially at night. But Daddy said I can turn on the light or call him whenever I need to. And now he makes my breakfast every day himself. The process of rebuilding the bond between father and daughter was delicate, with advances and setbacks. Richard, guided by therapists, learned to be truly present, not just physically, but emotionally available for Louisa. In the 8th month after the trial, a new hearing determined that Louisa would definitively return to her father's custody, with periodic monitoring for another year. The psychosocial team considered that Richard had demonstrated genuine change and consistent commitment to his daughter's well-being. However, a surprise awaited Jane. During the hearing, Louisa asked to speak with Judge Ashton privately. When she returned, the magistrate made an unexpected announcement. At the express request of the minor, and considering the emotional bonds established, this court authorizes Mrs. Jane Connors to maintain regular, unsupervised visitation, including the possibility of Louisa spending weekends at her residence, by agreement with the father. Richard, far from the proud man he had been, approached Jane after the hearing. I know I can never fully compensate for what happened, but I want you to know that the doors of our home will always be open to you. Louisa considers you a fundamental part of her life, and I owe you more than words can express. That same day, as a celebration, Jane took Louisa to see her small apartment for the first time, a simple yet cozy space, with potted plants on the windows and colorful walls. On the balcony, they planted a pot of sunflowers together. These flowers always seek the sun, Jane explained. Even on cloudy days, they know where to turn. Like me? Louisa asked with surprising wisdom for her 8 years. Exactly like you, little one. 2 years passed. The Louisa Miller Albright case generated repercussions that transcended the individual sphere. Extensive media coverage and public commotion resulted in congressional hearings on child protection in high vulnerability contexts, including environments of apparent economic privilege. Louisa's Law, as it became known, was approved with broad bipartisan support, establishing mandatory training protocols for domestic workers, educators, and healthcare professionals in identifying signs of psychological mistreatment. The legislation also strengthened protection mechanisms for vulnerable whistleblowers and created specific channels for anonymous reports. Jane, now with a degree in education and specializing in educational psychology, became a respected voice in the field of child protection. Along with other professionals and former whistleblowers, she founded the organization Watchful Eyes, offering training, legal, and psychological support to domestic workers who witnessed abusive situations. Victoria was sentenced to 4 years in a semi-open prison regime for mistreatment, misappropriation of funds and threats, in addition to compensation for emotional distress. Richard, after completing remedial programs for negligence, now dedicated himself to funding responsible parenting programs for executives, using his own experience as an example of the cost of emotional absence. As for Louisa, now 10 years old, her transformation was remarkable. Back in regular school, she excelled in arts and sciences. She regained a healthy weight and displayed the typical energy of her age. Although she still occasionally faced nightmares and moments of anxiety, she now possessed tools to process them with the help of continued therapy. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, Richard, Jane, and Louisa gathered in Central Park to celebrate the girl's birthday. As they enjoyed a jointly prepared picnic, Louisa watched fascinated by the butterflies landing on nearby flowers. "Aunt Jane, did you know that butterflies are born as caterpillars? The teacher showed us in science class. They get trapped in a dark cocoon, but then they come out colorful and beautiful, flying around." Jane and Richard exchanged emotional glances, recognizing the involuntary metaphor. "It's true, little one," Jane replied. "Some transformations only happen after difficult periods." Louisa reflected for a moment, with a maturity that always surprised the adults around her. Then she smiled and concluded, "Like me, right? I was also in a sad cocoon, but now I can fly." At that instant, a blue butterfly delicately landed on her outstretched finger. Louisa remained perfectly still, marveling at the fragile creature's trust. It was the perfect image of her own journey, from fragility to strength, from confinement to freedom, from fear to hope. And as the butterfly eventually took flight again, Louisa watched it with bright eyes, no longer the invisible child she once was, but a vibrant girl who, thanks to the courage of someone who refused to be silent, now had a whole future of possibilities ahead of her. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that Louisa and Jane's story has touched your heart. To follow more narratives that explore the complexity of human relationships and the strength of resilience, we have prepared a special playlist with equally moving stories. Find it by clicking the link on the left. If this story awakened something in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Daily, we bring content that illuminates different aspects of the human experience. Also, share in the comments. Have you ever witnessed a situation where the courage of a single person completely changed someone's life? We look forward to reading your stories.